So, back in the summer of 1995, after years of this brutal, grinding war and a whole lot of international hand-wringing, NATO finally unleashed an air campaign that would bring the Bosnian War to an end. It was called Operation Deliberate Force. And you know what? It didn't just stop a war. It fundamentally changed how wars would be fought from then on. So, let's dig into how this whole thing came to be and why its aftershocks are still being felt today.
To really get why this operation was even necessary, you have to understand the sheer savagery of the conflict. This quote, it just perfectly captures the feeling at the time. The sense that this wasn't some simple political disagreement. Nope. This was a deep-seated, violent eruption that had just consumed an entire country and, felt like it could only be stopped by some overwhelming outside force.
And this slide really drives home the tragedy. I mean, think about it. Just a decade before the war, Sarajevo was the smiling face of Yugoslavia to the world, hosting the Winter Olympics. It was a beacon of multicultural harmony, and by 1993, it was a city under constant, relentless bombardment, a symbol of absolute horror. The whiplash is just staggering, and the whole world was watching.
So, the big question is, how did it get this bad? Well, the story really begins with the slow and then very, very rapid disintegration of the nation of Yugoslavia. Let's take a look at the key moments that really lit the fuse.
It was really a cascade of events, one after the other. After the longtime leader Tito died in 1980, the glue holding this multi-ethnic country together just started to dissolve. Then, economic hardship in the 80s fanned the flames of nationalism. By 91, Slovenia and Croatia had broken away. But it was in Bosnia, this incredibly complex mix of Muslim Bosniaks, Orthodox Serbs, and Catholic Croats, that a vote for independence in 1992 just unleashed a full-scale, three-sided civil war.
And almost immediately, the world was introduced to this horrifying term for an ancient horror: ethnic cleansing. This wasn't just combat. It was a systematic campaign of terror, mainly by Bosnian Serb forces, to create an ethnically pure territory. The scale of the atrocities was, well, it was medieval, and it just stunned everyone watching from the outside.
Now, faced with this kind of savagery, you'd think the international community would act swiftly, right? But the response was anything but. For years, there was this sense of paralysis, this deep-seated reluctance to get drawn into what just seemed like an intractable, messy conflict.
A huge part of that paralysis was this bureaucratic nightmare called the dual key system. Okay, so what it meant was that for any military action, you needed two totally separate organizations, the UN, which is focused on peacekeeping, and NATO, a warfighting alliance, to both turn their key at the exact same time. It's like trying to get a committee to agree on what to have for lunch, except the decision is about dropping bombs. It was pretty much designed to fail.
And yeah, this quote from the chief U.S. negotiator Richard Holbrooke pretty much sums up the result. He didn't mince words. The dual key system was a disaster. I mean, you had situations where a Serb artillery piece would be shelling Sarajevo, but by the time the approvals came through from both UN and NATO headquarters, maybe hours later, the gun was long gone. It was just a recipe for total inaction.
But then, in 1995, a series of events happened that were just so horrific, they finally broke through all that political indecision. The world's patience just ran out. And the entire calculus for intervention changed, dramatically. Let's look at the final events that shattered the stalemate.
Okay, first, in May, Bosnian Serb forces responded to a minor NATO strike by taking UN peacekeepers hostage and literally chaining them to potential targets as human shields. It was a profound humiliation for the UN. Then, in July, the UN declared safe area of Srebrenica was overrun. This led to the systematic slaughter of over 8,000 Muslim men and boys. And finally, on August 28th, a mortar attack on a crowded Sarajevo market, the second such massacre at that very spot, was the final trigger. Something had to be done.
So when the decision was finally made, the objectives were actually super clear and, this is really important, they were limited. This wasn't about conquering the Bosnian Serbs or nation building. It was about forcing them to stop shelling safe areas, pull back their heavy guns, let UN forces move freely, and get the airport open for humanitarian aid. The goals were tactical and achievable, all designed to force a diplomatic solution.
And so on August 30th, 1995, just 2 days after that marketplace bombing, Operation Deliberate Force was launched. The years of hesitant response were over. It was time for a decisive one. And the scale of this response was just Immense. Over just 3 weeks, aircraft from 15 different nations flew 3,515 missions. I mean, think about that. This wasn't some pinprick strike. This was a sustained, multinational air campaign, and it was designed to systematically dismantle the Bosnian Serb war machine.
And this right here, this is where we see a fundamental shift in warfare. During the Gulf War, just 4 years earlier, less than 10% of the munitions used were smart bombs. In Bosnia, that number jumped to nearly 70%. Deliberate force was, in a very real sense, the world's first true precision war. And that was a total game changer.
And it was a whole suite of new tech that all came together. For the first time, you had the Predator drone giving commanders this God's eye view, confirming targets in near real time. You had ship-launched Tomahawk missiles that could strike deep inside enemy territory with pinpoint accuracy, which created this incredible psychological shock. New F-16s could actively hunt and destroy the very air defense systems meant to stop them, while Prowler jets just blinded enemy radar. This combination meant NATO didn't just control the skies, it owned them.
The campaign itself unfolded in these very distinct phases. First, NATO took out the eyes and ears of the Bosnian Serb army, their air defenses and command posts. Then there was this brief pause for talks, which the Serbs mostly used to stall. Big mistake. When the bombing resumed, it was punishing. It hit their ability to move and resupply. Then came the shock of the Tomahawks, which one diplomat later said scared the hell out of them. So, facing this relentless pressure from the air and a new ground offensive from Croatian and Bosnian armies, their war effort just collapsed.
The bombing stopped on September 20th. The war was effectively over. But the story doesn't end there. The legacy of this short, intense campaign is, well, it's complex, and it continues to be debated to this very day.
And that brings us to the big question, the one historians still argue about. Was it the air campaign alone that brought peace? Or was it something a little more complicated?
The truth is, it wasn't just one thing. It was really a perfect storm. The bombing was a decisive factor, there's no doubt about it. But it was happening at the same time that Bosnian and Croatian forces were actually winning on the ground for the first time. You had U.S. diplomats working tirelessly behind the scenes. And frankly, after 3 years, everyone was just exhausted. And crucially, Serbia's president, Slobodan Milosevic, wanted sanctions lifted and saw his Bosnian Serb proxies as a liability. So the air power tipped the scales, but the scales were already moving.
And this, right here, this might be the most important legacy of the whole operation. The true revolution of these precision weapons wasn't just their accuracy, it was political. Think about it. By promising minimal civilian casualties, these smart bombs lowered the political risk of getting involved. For leaders who had hesitated for years, this was a massive game changer. Suddenly, military intervention seemed less messy, less costly in terms of public opinion. It made the decision to finally act, well, palatable.
And that leaves us with this final thought to chew on. Operation Deliberate Force was, undeniably, a success. It stopped a genocide, and it forced to peace. But what was its ultimate lesson? Did it provide a new, effective model for using limited military force for humanitarian ends? Or did it create a seductive and perhaps dangerous illusion that complex ethnic and political conflicts could be solved cleanly from 30,000 feet with just the push of a button? That's a question the world is still trying to answer.